So at this time, I'm going to ask an extraordinary poet from South Africa who lives in South Africa, who actually is currently, who lives in the Karoo, Maren Bondestein. And Maren is going to read to us a poem that is very significant, particularly about the situation in Myanmar and the significance of this day in South Africa.
Thanks.
So let me
Running,
just,
yeah, sorry.
yes, let me just show it on the screen.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Running, hiding, shooting, killing. The country is on fire. The people are running. I look for her because I'm worried about her. She does magic tricks in one city and irons her clothes in another. She sells SIM cards in one place and sings and dances in another. I've been everywhere, but she's nowhere to be found, does not greet me with a hug. If I ever see her smile again, I will run to her and embrace her. I look at things through my own eyes. I feel sad without having been asked to. Without being ordered to, the soldiers shoot at the people. The whole country is on fire. People run and hide. I look for her because I want to. I look for her because I'm worried about her. I am so distressed that I have become the protagonist of this story.
Thank you. Thank you, Maren, for that wonderful reading. I now want to introduce the executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, Ms. Tali Nates, Director Tali Nates, who will say a few words about the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and this series and this time in our country and in our world.
Thank you, Mdu, and if you can just stop the share.
Yes, let me, there we go.
Thank you, Mdu. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all of you, to this second in our series with the Sylt Foundation, Voices of Belonging and Resistance. To my very good friend Indra Wuso, the brains behind this series, thank you for your partnership and for the friendship. It is also important for us to partner tonight with the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, and I will speak a little bit more about our partnership with that center through the years and with its director, Dr. Simon Adams, that is with us tonight from New York, and with PEN South Africa. And it is wonderful to have Bongani with us from the Cape Town office. Because tonight we are also launching a poetry book, a poetry of resistance, a poetry of really shouting out against injustice. And this could not have come in a better time. April is Genocide Awareness Month. This month alone, we remembered 27 years since the genocide that targeted the Tutsi population of Rwanda in 1994. We remembered the Holocaust, the mass murder of the Jews of Europe between 1939 and 1945. We just this weekend remembered the Armenian genocide, the mass murder of 1.5 million Christian Armenians by the Ottoman Empire between 1915 and 1923. And while we remember atrocities of the past, atrocities are still happening in our world today. So what can we, as memory activists, as educators, as civil society, as people that care, what can we do to learn from the past in order to do something about the present. And no one can do that better than my friend for many, many years, Simon. And I would like to introduce Dr. Simon Adams to you and ask him to share with us his expertise about what is happening on the ground in the last years, but specifically from the 1st of February of this year in Myanmar. So who is Dr. Simon Adams? He is the Executive Director of the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. That center works to prevent mass atrocity crimes, genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity throughout the world, and conducts advocacy with the UN Security Council and Human Rights Council. Dr. Adams previously worked with governments and civil society organizations in South Africa, East Timor, Rwanda, and elsewhere. He's the author of 5 books, and I believe the last book was written in lockdown during this pandemic. I can't wait to have it in South Africa and to read it. And the focus of his writing is on international conflict. He has also written for the New York Times and many other publications. And of course, he regularly appears on as an expert commentator on international media on issues related to human rights, mass atrocities, and international justice. I'm sure you saw Simon Adams on BBC and Sky News and CNN in the last month or two. It is wonderful to have you with us in Johannesburg again. That is where we met, Simon, when you headed Monash University all those years ago. And it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to welcome you and hear from you. Simon, the Zoom floor and microphone is yours.
Thank you for that, Tali, and it's a pleasure to be back in Johannesburg, South Africa. Only if across the Zoom floor, it's certainly somewhere that I will always think of as home. And you know, I've had the honor of and pleasure of living in South Africa twice in my life. Once for a period during the 1990s, during the transition, and again, as you mentioned, from 2008 to 2010 or something. So I want to thank all the hosts for inviting me here to speak. And in keeping with the date, I also want to acknowledge that, of course, it is Freedom Day in South Africa. And as somebody who was first inspired to join the struggle against apartheid in South Africa as a kid, you know, of an Irish immigrant family living in Australia, it was art actually that brought me into, you know, awareness of what was happening in South Africa, music primarily, but also writing and other forms of art that first made me aware of what was happening in South Africa, then eventually got me to get up and join the international movement. So let me start though by maybe saying some words about Myanmar and the current terrible situation there. As people are, I'm sure, aware, on the 1st of February, a couple of months ago, Myanmar's military, headed by Commander-in-Chief General Min Aung Hlaing, overthrew the civilian-led government in a coup and declared a state of emergency. And this event and the subsequent atrocities that have taken place, they didn't come out of nowhere. I think that's the first thing I'd really like to emphasize. In fact, they're part of a long history of Myanmar's military terrorizing its own population, committing atrocities against their own people. And in fact, Myanmar, since the period of decolonization, has spent more years under military rule than it has ever spent under any form of civilian government. So that's the first thing to mention. And where do you start with a talk like this? Well, maybe if we can just wind back the clock a little bit and throw our minds back to even just a few years ago, which is, in 2017, that same leader of Myanmar's military, General Lung, under his leadership, committed a genocide against the Rohingya minority in Rakhine State, who are Myanmar is an overwhelmingly Buddhist country, many ethnic groups, but one ethnic group, the Bamar, are the biggest. The Rohingya are about 1% of the population. They're one of the few Muslim minority populations in the country. Traditionally had been very persecuted, and they turned that persecution into an outright attempt to destroy that community once and for all. And, as due to the work that I do, we saw this happening in real time. We saw the satellite images. We saw the villages being burnt each day. We were hearing the reports from people on the ground, eyewitness reports. We had staff that we eventually sent to the border with Bangladesh. We also had other people who were feeding information through to us. It was a terrible, terrible process of systematic destruction. And it's for that reason that just a few years ago, a UN fact-finding mission actually recommended that the general who oversaw that, the general who subsequently led the coup, that general be charged with genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So a terrible situation. And again, why I dwell on that is because I think this is the cost that the international community pays again and again when we allow impunity to happen, when we rest on the politics of indifference and allow terrible things to happen in the world. So in the aftermath of the genocide, we worked, and the international community did almost nothing to help the poor Rohingya population. Bangladesh ended up with about 60,000 who fled, the majority of the population, only a population of just over 1 million people. And it's now up to 900,000 taking refuge in Bangladesh. But in the aftermath of that, we tried to work with states to look at a legal angle. So we were looking at, first of all, at the International Criminal Court, and there was a very low chance of having anything happen through there because Myanmar is not a state's party to the Rome Statute, and won't go too much into international law, but it was a low possibility, unless the Security Council referred it. So we started looking at the International Court of Justice, where you can have state responsibility rather than individual criminal responsibility. Because Myanmar is actually a party to the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And so in theory, this should have been easy. All we needed was one state who were also a party to the Genocide Convention to take Myanmar to the International Court of Justice and try and hold them accountable. Well, I don't know if this will shock or surprise anybody here, but we made a list of all 193 members of the UN Security of the United Nations, and we started going through one by one who is a signatory, who could potentially take a case, reaching out at ambassador level, at foreign minister level, at director of the foreign ministry, one by one going through and crossing them off the list as they said no to us, that they were unprepared to take the case. Unprepared in some cases because they were afraid of China and who are traditionally seen as the Myanmar's kind of protectors in international politics, or afraid for other sorts of reasons. And I mention this because it sounds like a terrible and a depressing story, but there is a positive side to this. There was one country that actually eventually said yes, and I remember this so clearly because we monitor the media all around the world and so forth. And our expert, who's an expert in Myanmar, came in and said, the Minister of Justice of the Gambia, the smallest country on the African continent, was just visiting the refugee camp in Cox's Bazar. And he just came out and he just made a statement to the press, to the Bangladesh press, saying that how shocked he was, how his heart went out to the people there, and how if the international community wasn't prepared to live up to its responsibility to protect the people, the Rohingya people, he would do so and he would take a case to the International Court of Justice. So we were immediately on the phone to various Gambian diplomats, who had at that stage hadn't even heard what the minister had said. They had no idea what was going on. There'd been no government decision. But through all of that, we managed to forge a kind of a partnership with ourselves and the Global Justice Center, and also with the government of the Gambia, which resulted in a historic case being taken to the International Court of Justice. That case is ongoing, but there was an attempt. There's an ongoing attempt to hold the generals accountable for what they've done. I mention this, as I said, because I think it points to the power of individuals. Now, that individual happened to be the Minister of Justice, but there were many other ministers of justice, ministers of foreign affairs, ministers of that, and the other, and government bureaucrats who had, if not slammed the door in our face, had certainly politely declined to answer these appeals. It took one person who was affected by what he saw and decided that he was going to do everything within his power to make a difference. So that is the kind of lead up to situation since the 1st of February, because it is that climate of impunity. Having got away with genocide, is it any surprise that the generals who were unhappy with the civilian-led government since 2011, they've only had civilian-led rules really since 2015, I guess, basically when the election was held. Is it any surprise that they thought, well, why are we relying on these other people who we don't particularly agree with when we should just be running the country again ourselves? Since the 1st of February, since the coup, it has been a situation of widespread and systematic crimes that may amount to crimes against humanity under international law, largely through the military and police using deadly force against unarmed protesters in the streets. I mean, my staff sent me an update this morning. This may be out of date because they're killing people every day, but at last count, they've killed 753 people, mainly shot dead, some tortured to death since the 1st of February, and about 3,441 people are currently detained without access to any kind of legal due process due to the military coup. So despite all of that, and I guess this does hark back in some ways to the experience of South Africa, despite the complete disproportionate force that's been exerted against them, what is extraordinary and what is inspirational is that people do continue to take to the streets. They do continue to protest in all kinds of imaginative ways to defy the military in everything that they do, and are constantly calling on the international community to uphold its international responsibility to protect, this principle that was adopted in 2005. And you may have seen some evidence of this on social media or elsewhere, or in the news if you follow the situation in Myanmar. And in our work, we experience it every day. Not a day goes past that I don't receive emails, even though the military has cut the internet and in theory cut contact with the outside world. Every day we still get emails, we still get messages through one means or another. We still get people reaching out to us on social media, showing us their protests, showing their defiance of the regime, calling for the international community to respect their human rights and to help them uphold their human rights. So there's many ways that the international community could do that. And I don't want to bore people with a long talk about policy. I mean, we've been arguing since the start of this crisis that there are 5 things that any country and all countries should do. One is there should be an arms embargo. That Myanmar's military should not be able to buy a bullet, a bayonet, or anything else, a boot, from any other country in the world. Secondly, there should be targeted sanctions on the generals who are responsible. They should not be able to, that the military, in addition to being an instrument of terror, is a massive business enterprise, very corrupt. They have overseas bank accounts. They should be locked down, shut down. They should not be able to move their money and not be able to fly around the world at will. Thirdly, there must be divestment. There are a lot of business interests, including overseas business interests in Myanmar. Some of them have started to divest, but we need to put pressure on them to do so. Fourthly, there should be absolutely no diplomatic recognition of this regime. South Africa should not recognize the diplomats sent to its country by the military as the legitimate representatives of the people of Myanmar. There is an elected government. It should be the recognized representatives in every diplomatic mission around the world. And finally, there has to be international accountability, whether that be under universal jurisdiction or whether through an ICC referral. The generals must be held accountable for what they're doing. So let me maybe just end these comments, and I'm obviously more than happy to answer any questions or comments that people might have, and would rather interact in that way than just talking to my computer in my daughter's bedroom with the strange shoe art behind me. But maybe end by saying, that over the weekend we saw that there was a summit of ASEAN, which is the regional organization, which made some effort to criticize the regime, but fell well short of the expectations of people in Myanmar who are demanding their human rights and who deserve to be protected. So we're not, and one gets a sense, this isn't a comment directed at ASEAN in particular, but I think more broadly, one gives a sense that there are a number of governments who are just kind of holding back at the moment, waiting for the blood to dry in the streets a little bit, but who would be happy to resume some kind of diplomatic relations with the military regime in Myanmar. So I think that's where it comes back to us, which is why I tried to underline the role of the individual so importantly, and why I think it's so interesting and significant that we're having this conversation on Freedom Day. I think it was the bravery and resilience of South Africa's people which led to the remarkable transition that took place in 1994. But the international community did play a role at points along the way there, of helping sustain that struggle, of showing solidarity with it, of pressuring, of letting people know that they weren't alone. And it also played a role in other sorts of ways as well. So for example, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but for years, South African diplomats could not play a role in the affairs of the UN General Assembly because the UN General Assembly did not recognize their delegation as representing the South African people, because it was a white, constituted only undemocratic state representatives. So it points to the sorts of ways in which pressure can be applied, even in the overly polite world of international diplomacy. So the point I'd like to end on is this: I think the international community it failed to uphold its responsibility to protect the Rohingya and to protect them from genocide. And I remember speaking at an event at the UN General Assembly in must have been early 2018, and I said at that event, and it was something that kind of got picked up on a little bit in the media and has become something that has been attributed to me more broadly, is that I said that you can't build democracy in Myanmar on the bones of the Rohingya. And I think that was true then, and it's true now. But I would add to that there cannot be peace and stability in Myanmar under military rule. The country is currently ungovernable. And no one gets a sense, or I should say, sorry, that even though what I said before is, I think, true, that one gets a sense that some countries are waiting for the blood to dry on the streets before they restore relations with this murderous military. That should not be allowed to happen. Myanmar's generals must be held accountable for what they have done. And the only real lasting solution to the current crisis is the release of political detainees, an end to extrajudicial killings. Democracy in Myanmar can only be built on universal human rights, and that requires international solidarity. So I think the people of Myanmar have demonstrated unprecedented bravery and resilience, but I think we all have a role to play as well, all of us, me and you. So let's make sure that we pressure our own governments, our own business communities, and let's work with our own civil society organizations to make sure that they also speak up, that they stand up, and that they act in support of these long-suffering people in Myanmar. I think I'll leave it there, Tali. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will ask you to stay for questions later. So I'm handing back to Mdu at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali. And thank you, Simon, for that little bit of history and connection between what's happening right now in Myanmar and the significance of this day in South Africa. Because sometimes I think we forget that history can happen again if we forget why it happened the first time. So I think the significance of that is that we must remember. And I'm going to introduce once again Mayren Bonderstein to recite a poem for us. And the name of this poem is called I Picked Up My Rabbit. But before I hand over to Mayren, I'm going to ask us just 20 seconds. Can we all just, for 20 seconds, be in silence and remember the significance of this day and what's happening in Myanmar? Just 20 seconds of silence. Thank you. So I'm going to put the poem on screen. And Mayren, over to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make clear that these poems are written by Lu Galay, who is kind of on the run at the moment from Myanmar. And I am reading these poems in honor of him. And just kind of, this is quite an interesting poem. It's the almost dissociation in the situation of war. I picked up my rabbit and held it in my arms. Now I am panicking. I get up from my chair and run amok. Just one moment ago, I picked up my rabbit and held it in my arms. Now it is in the movie that I am watching. It looks like it doesn't want to be in my arms anymore. Now I'm panicking. I want to do something else to please my rabbit. So I cut open the screen with a knife and retrieve it. I have landed in a bad place. I look like a plane crash. I rob a fried chicken stall to buy rabbit food. I just picked up my rabbit, a bit roughly, I admit, and held it in my arms. But look what is happening to me now. I don't know how to make it happy anymore. Maybe it isn't my rabbit after all. Maybe it originally came from a movie or a book. Or maybe it came from a fairy tale. I just don't know anymore. But one thing is certain. Only once in my life did I pick up a rabbit a bit too roughly.
Thank you for that, Mayren. What an interesting poem. And also to unpack this series to us, I'm going to introduce Indra Uso. Indra is the founder and director of the Sylt Foundation. And it's been a pleasure to work with Indra and to be in this partnership with her and the Sylt Foundation. And over to you, Indra, and welcome and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Ndu, Tali, for partnering with the Sylt Foundation, for offering us the possibility to actually run a series like the Voices of Belonging and Resistance. And interestingly, when we started that series or tried to create it, it was like, I think last year in December. I mean, we thought COVID is a problem, but we never thought, and we thought, oh, there is this possibility to actually connect the world. And we use it to actually give poets and artists a platform that they usually don't have in these times. We never thought that a coup happened in between and that our friend Dee, who actually was then already invited, suddenly couldn't take part in this. So yeah, I'm a bit emotional with this because I have been working in Myanmar for several years now. I've been staying for months on end in this country. I've worked with a lot of people there. Some are actually imprisoned right now. So it is some kind of a miracle and a wonder that we actually hear and can celebrate that there is a book like this coming out and that we connect through the arts. And you know, the arts is some kind of a guerrilla war that we fight because, you know, we don't have the diplomacy, people don't see us. So it's really wonderful to have this voice out and that people say, okay, there is people that speak out. I mean, Dee is not only a poet, he's also a human rights lawyer and he is a Rakhine. So he was very outspoken against the genocide, against the Rohingya. And this makes him also very vulnerable in this situation. So he couldn't come, but he once in a while, he has internet and we can talk. So what he did, at least he sent a greeting. And I think we should hear this now. Mdu, maybe you share this.
I'm a poet. My name is Lu Galay. I'm from Myanmar. People from poetry life usually call me D. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you guys today. Currently in Myanmar, the political situation is not really good. It's very bad, actually. When the government shootings everywhere, and to the people's kids, old people, strikers, everybody, and everybody who was suspected to be the supporters of democratic movements or a supporter of anybody who against them were arrested and have to stay away from their house and internet line. So cut off everywhere. Only very, very few people got internet in Myanmar, but within a very limited time. So I'm very sorry I couldn't be with you guys. But anyway, I just want to say thank you to every single one of you.
Yeah, so that was this message. So yeah, am I back? Yeah, so as I said, it's a miracle that we have this book and that we made it. And actually Maren and Dee had both residencies at the Sylt Foundation. And at the very beginning, the idea was that they both meet on the boring island of Sylt. Then came COVID and that has to be changed. And now it's also the military coup and now they can't even communicate together. So really getting a retranslation of the poetry done was quite adventurous, and that's what we want to talk about. So Mdu already introduced Maren. I'm very happy, delighted that Bongani Kona is with us. Bongani is a writer and an editor of Chimurenga, one of my favorite African culture magazines. And Bongani is here as a member of the South African PEN. And this is thanks to Nadia Davids. And Nadia, I met while I was running a series at the Goethe Institute, but also a bi-monthly series of literary talks. And there was another Burmese writer there. And I don't call his name because he's imprisoned and his family asked that we don't talk about it because he actually has a trial in 2 days. And they don't want to jeopardize this tiny little chance he has that there might be a positive outcome. So yeah, maybe we start this conversation with Maren and Bongani, and I just want to ask Bongani, how do you feel coming, from South African background, when we look today at Freedom Day, at the struggle against apartheid? How do you feel one can support writers from Myanmar? How do you feel about reading this poetry? Because it's very unknown, obviously, because it's new.
Thank you, Indra. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are at this present moment. My name is Bongani, and I'd like to begin by just saying, firstly, our hearts go out to the people of Myanmar, and we stand in solidarity with them. And also just to say Happy Freedom Day to everyone here in South Africa. And then, sure, I'm looking at my screen here, and there's my face, which is kind of creating some kind of dissonance. So I'm gonna bring back the ordinary squares. Sorry about that. And then just to answer your question, Indra, I think I want to, if it's okay, I'd like to answer it 2 ways. One as a reader, and because I'm still very new to PEN South Africa, I actually start in May, so I'm still very new, but I'll do my best to answer your question, but from 2 ways. And for me, the first part is to say that PEN stands for one of the things that PEN stands for is the principle of unhampered transmission of thought within each nation and between all nations. And members pledge themselves to oppose any form of suppression of freedom of expression in the country and community to which they belong, as well as throughout the world and wherever this is possible. And I think because the subject of our conversation is also around translation, I feel one of the things, and it's lovely to meet you too, Maren, and thank you for your amazing work on this incredible, incredible book. And I think one of the things about translation is that it allows us translation is a kind of technology that allows the transmission of ideas across borders, thoughts and ideas across borders. And for me, to answer your question about what it was like reading this collection, what I felt like as a reader is that I felt like it's going to sound very cheesy, but I really felt like I could hear these heartbeats. And that for me is something really special, because I think reading is one of those really intimate things that allows you to connect with another consciousness. And just reading these poems, it's just in a quiet room. I read the collection twice, and I really just felt that I could hear this writer's heartbeat. And that does something to us, that changes us. So I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Oh, this is actually beautiful. And I'm so happy actually that we do have the recording, because Dee will hear this. Because as he can't be with us, but of course he's still with us, and he will be so happy to hear, because, when we started this thinking about, look, we should really make this book happen, and said, who is interested in poetry? And I think especially in a time like now, poetry really gives hope and teaches us resilience, and make voices heard that are usually not heard. And I'm actually also a member of the PEN in Germany, and the PEN in Germany is also very much engaged, especially with writers now in Belarus. And it's so important, because these writers are often the only ones that speak out and are heard abroad, so that they can talk about what happens in their countries. So it is very important to support this. And I think this is one of the major wonderful tasks that PEN does. But coming back to the conversation and to the translation, Maren, how did you feel? First of all, Maren said, no, Indra, you can't call me a translator, because it's a retranslation, because I don't speak Burmese. So Maren, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you approached this book, this poetry, as you are a poet yourself, and the translation.
Thank you, Indra. I think what happened is that we got this sort of a bundle that was translated sort of into English. Some of it looked like Google translations, and it also felt there wasn't sort of a poet's eye over this. So what I did first is I read what I had a couple of times over and over again to try and source the poet's voice, to try and feel what are the patterns, what metaphors does this poet use, who is he, what are his sensibilities. And then I started working with the poems as well as I could. And then a wonderful thing was that parallel to myself doing this, Arthur Becker in Germany was working on the poetry as well. And by some coincidence, I am also German speaking as well as English speaking. And we could have a conversation and look at each other's translations. And like a negotiation in my own mind. Yes, Arthur, you've got it right here, or no, I'm going to do it this way. So that was wonderful, another kind of voice coming in there. And what I did is, and so thank you, Arthur, for that. It was lovely working on across these voices. And then as the process went on, I just went over and over and tried to craft a voice, 4D and a poetic rhythm and clarity without losing the absurdity of the poems. And I think absurdity is what Marx sees this poetry, and trying to keep that, but still so that the reader can trust the absurdity rather than thinking this absurdity is a mistake of translation. So that's what I did. And it was a wonderful project. And I feel very close to Dee, whom I spoke to one day on WhatsApp. By accident, I dialed and there he was. So I felt even closer to the poet. So, and I've emailed him, but haven't heard much, so wonderful.
Yeah, that are some of the weird things, that suddenly there is a connection and then you speak and then it feels also very weird that suddenly there is such an intimate situation where you never thought about it as such. So yeah, Arthur was with Dee in Chile, so they met already. So Arthur knew his poetry well before. So the German book will come out also next week, I guess, and I'm very excited about this too. So yeah, Maren, maybe we should do another poem.
Yes, and I like this poem right now because it's almost like Dee is introducing himself to us. The people in the photograph, I don't know them. For all I know, they are long dead, long gone people in a photograph, in an old newspaper. The times are different, yet we can still be friends. Please allow myself to introduce myself. Okay.
Thank you, Maren. And now we introduce Tuomo Manninen. Tuomo is a Finnish photographer from Helsinki, and he is actually very famous for taking group portraits. And I looked it up. It was for almost now 25 years that you've been doing this. Some of your group portraits were shown at the Venice Biennale and in many other shows and museums of the world. We met actually when you did group portraits in Soweto some 8 years ago, and went together to Phnom Penh and also to Yangon. Tuomo was part of called Violent Memories, an art festival that Burmese artist Phu Mon, poet Han Lin, Dee and me curated in 2017, when Myanmar seemed to be quite becoming normal somehow, or the young people at least felt it became quite normal. And it was very interesting because we met older people that were really very afraid that this democratization is not really going well, or they were afraid that the old comes back. And all the young people thought, no, we are on the right track now. And when you look at this from today, it's even more sad than it was there already. So maybe you show us a virtual book about through your Rangon groups.
Okay, hello also from my side. So Mndu is showing us some images. Like Indra told me, this is a long-running series where I photograph groups of portraits of groups of people around the world, people who are doing the same thing by profession or by hobby or something just brings them together. This photograph is from fishermen at the river at the Botang harbor, and go out to fish, or if there's somebody they have to bring to the other side of the river, they carry goods, whatever they have been doing. There's been fishermen doing it for centuries, and they are still keeping up with it. How about the next one, please? This is a group of builders, and we were there in spring 2017, just before the second wave of the Rohingya genocide, as explained to us by Dr. Adams in the beginning, and the whole city was in a kind of a building boom, which probably was partly because there was foreign capital coming in, but also partly because people were really optimistic about the future. Can we see the next one, please? Yeah, here we go. This is a family of street vendors, and I sort of like I'm personally very fond of this photograph because I kind of like the idea of the family, the way the lady poses with her child is incredible, and they are basically going around the city selling watermelon for people to eat. What you can see in the faces of her and the child, that's kind of a the best I could figure it out was Indra knows probably better, but the best I got explained to me, it was kind of a healthy makeup choice, in a sense, to kind of keep your skin refreshed and moisturized during the day. Did you get it better, Indra?
No, it's actually sunscreen as well. It's called Tanaka.
Okay. Can we see the next one, please? And there's an, obviously because Myanmar was a British colony, there's an Anglican church smack in the middle of the town, and Holy Trinity Cathedral. I've always been fascinated of people and their beliefs, and how worlds collide and connect, and a choir of an Anglican church in Myanmar was actually a group I wanted to photograph on a Sunday morning right after the Mass. Can we see the next one, please? And this is kind of a how I saw Yangon spring 2017. There's an incredible amount of people of Myanmar who are very young. If I remember it correctly, it was something like 50% were younger than 25, or was it even younger than 80? But I mean, remarkable amount of citizens are very young, and they were just so they were almost drunk with the possibility of being part of the outside world with cafes and with internet and with music and with songs. And I had a couple of days earlier, I had made an appointment with another group of punks in a park, but obviously in a big punk rock tradition, they never showed up for the appointment. So a couple of days later, I was I with you, Indra? Where we were together there, remember?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So
that was the first time, even though I was there quite often, it was the first time that I saw so many of them together.
Yeah. So I actually, on the other side of a very busy street, I saw one of these guys walking and joined by a couple of others, and we started running after them through the sort of a 6 lanes of downtown Yangon rush hour traffic in plus 35 degrees, and managed to, after a couple of minutes, managed to get them in the corner of a market. And I think it took us another 5 minutes to get our breath down and moisturize, to drink a couple of liters of water to rehydrate in order to be functional again. And they were extremely nice and very posing, obviously. You didn't have to teach them how to pose. They knew it already. Can we have the next one, please? This is from an advertising agency, Next, which was one of the I kind of like the idea of photographing advertising people, because they are always avant-garde. So this was sort of the avant-garde of Yangon youth in 2017. Could we have the next one, please? Another avant-garde are always the people, barbers and hairdressers, because they always know the style a bit ahead than most of the people. And this is sort of a crew of downtown barbershop with one of the customers, or even I think two. I think the guy the gentleman on the left is also a customer as well, who just wanted to be part of the group, or hangs out at the barbershop, or is a barber. And this is from a gym or dojo of Sayasan Bando. Bando is a local self-defense form, which is kind of related to Wushu, known as Kung Fu, very popular in Myanmar. Sayasan, who gave name to this dojo, was one of the rebel leaders of the 1930s rebellion, like one of the first independence people, so to say. Can we change? Oh, the Pullman bar, or Pullman Hotel in Yangon, one of the ritziest places in the city, who sort of like is proud of their martinis to be served in the exact temperature. Another colonialist fracture, which got reopened a couple of years ago, a few years back, and was the best place in town. Could we have the next one, please? And clothes shop we were walking past this. The family was having lunch there, and the right side of the photograph, and then we started setting up for the photograph there after they finished lunch, and they sat down. And while I was putting on my lights, I noticed that on the left-hand side, if you look closely on the sofa, there's one gentleman sleeping, actually napping. And so I put another flashlight especially for him, and he never woke up during the shooting, so he kept sleeping the mid-afternoon or early afternoon sun is very, very harsh. So it's nice to have a decent nap. And can we have the next one, please? And this is a group of young writers and poets from the city of Yangon, and 3 of them are currently in the insane prison, waiting for their sentences. Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity to showing you these images.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tuomo. You know, you look at the pictures and, you know, we talked with them and you think, oh, what are these people doing now? You know, I mean, apart from the poets, but all the, like the people in the shop that we passed, or, and how do they cope? And it becomes so alive again. So, but something before we look for the Q&A, I think I want to show the book again so that there's a lottery. But what I actually want to say also, that the cover of the book is made by Vietnamese artist Tu Kim Vu. I don't know if Tu is with us tonight, because it was also a collaboration we did in Yangon with Dee and Tu. And Sally Wines, a South African artist, she designed the book, and also her beautiful drawings are also part of the book. So it's really a collaboration like what we usually do in the Sylt Foundation. So it's art and literature together, and it adds another layer on this book. Yeah, I think maybe Maren, you have another poem and people can ask, then we do an open the floor and have a Q&A, Charlie.
Sure.
Take good aim at your enemy. The other day, a guy in my neighborhood died. He had been squabbling with his neighbor for years. On hearing the news, the neighbor cried and said, "It will be my turn next, my friend." When boxing, both winner and loser are asked to leave the ring in the end. Time and again, I wake up on battlefields, surrounded by dead bodies. I wake up feeling so lonely, and staying alive has become exhausting. In the end, battlefields always bend like rainbows. You will know a crow when you see one, because a crow will always be a crow. But when you know someone to be your enemy, they are never your enemy. My love, this hand which touches you right now has failed to hold on to civility, just as your laughter cannot be deciphered by people. We look at each other. In our eyes, the smoke from gunpowder, that which I call adversity, falls like the red flowers of a flamboyant tree. I take courage from the art of happiness.
I think, can you manage the Q&A now, or is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
So we have some comments and a few questions. I'm going to start with, let's say maybe it's a question for Simon, because I think there are other questions and comments for everyone else, but I think for Simon, because you made so many connections between the current and the past and the emotional connections. And so there's a question saying, so thank you, Simon, for so much for your talk. How do you explain the international indifference to the situation in Myanmar. First to the genocide and now the coup.
Thanks for that. Let me put it a slightly different way. I think we need to separate the way that governments have responded and the way sometimes that large business interests respond to the sorts of things that we see happening on the ground, and the way that ordinary people respond. Because before this god-awful pandemic, hit us all and locked us all down in our homes and so forth, I got to travel around the world all the time and going to some places that are not exactly tourist destinations where people are facing armed conflict and atrocities, and you sometimes see human beings at their worst doing horrible things to one another. But I also get to see the flip side of that as well. I get to see people at their very best, people risking their lives literally to reach out and help their fellow human beings, but also tremendous acts of solidarity. So, one of the things that's been sort of heartbreaking, it hammers a rusty nail through my heart, sort of, when I see it in the current context. But it's a positive thing as well, as like people who, know who I am or see me on TV or something or follow me on social media. But I'll have people in the Congo who are like living in a little village in the Congo somewhere reach out to me and say, it's so terrible what's happening to those poor people in Myanmar. It reminds me of what we've been through. What can I do to help? Somebody who's living in a village, in Ituri province in the Congo, but who's consciously trying to make a connection with people in another country who look different, who speak a different language, who live on the other side of the world, but they can detect the humanness that binds us all together. And so that gives me enormous hope, because when I travel around the world, the message I hear from people again and again is not kind of, well, it's got nothing to do with me, it's none of my business if Myanmar's military wants to drive tanks over their own people or gun people down in the street. That's not what I hear at all. It doesn't matter, where in the world I am and who I'm talking to. I think there's a basic level of human empathy and of solidarity and suffering. People see that these are mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and brothers and sisters who are losing their lives. And I think it impacts on people in all kinds of different ways. Like, one of the things that that people commented on to me was, there was a particular picture of a young protester, a young woman who was shot dead by the military. And somebody who just in my neighborhood said to me, a younger person, although I'm 53 now, so everybody's younger to me, it seems, said, oh, she was wearing jeans like, the kind of jeans that I wear. And she had on kind of a pair of shoes like what so people could identify, even just, these are, they might look different on some level and speak a different language, but people can identify and people can relate. So I think it's that we are failed so often by our governments and by the international system who we look to. And I think the onus of responsibility is on our governments and is on that international system to do better, to uphold the promises, because we all know the sad truth, and I see that, I know that you're sitting in the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. The words "never again," we all know, we all say it. It was said at the end of the Second World War, and yet the history of the second half of the 20th century was not never again, it was again and again. And that is the greatest possible insult to the memory of people who lost their lives in the Holocaust. And I'm not Jewish, I'm not Tutsi, I'm not Khmer, I'm not from Myanmar, but you don't have to be. to see that there is something fundamentally wrong with a world in which people who are simply protesting for their universal human rights and for the right to elect their own government are being gunned down in the street. And I think the fact that our governments have not done enough, the fact that the international system hasn't done enough to uphold that promise of never again, to uphold its responsibility to protect, is something that we should not forgive them for, and that we in our own small ways, whether it be through a poem or through your art, or whether it's in your own local community or in your workplace or in whatever you do, that we try to raise our voices and we try to make those little ripples in the pond, which together can join up and be a tidal wave of change.
I have another question, which was sent to me directly, and it's for Simon and Tali, but I think the other speakers can also answer as well. And so the person is asking, how do you explain the situation in Myanmar? Is it simply an oppressive regime that's trying to maintain power at all cost, or are we seeing the early stages of a genocide? Because, and this is a tricky question, because we know that there's a very specific definition of that term genocide. So maybe this is an opportunity to explain what that definition is as well.
Do you want to go, Tali, or do you want me to say
I
something?
so enjoy that you are here and I don't have to work, that I don't mind to ask you to actually take it, and then the others can also come in.
Yeah, I think my busiest day at work is probably about half of what you do before 11 o'clock each morning. So I'm more than happy to take a stab at this one. I mean, I do think that we have to be very careful about the words that we use and the terms that we use. Genocide has a very specific meaning under international law. It's a very specific crime. And the man who invented that word, Raphael Lemkin, who of course was himself somebody, a Polish Jewish man who fled the Nazis and was trying to grapple with the experience of the Holocaust in Europe, invented that term to give a name to a crime that up until that point had no name. So it is a legally defined term. So we need to be very careful. And that's also true of the term crimes against humanity. You know, this is also legally defined under international law. And then we use a more general term, you know, of atrocities to describe, as a catch-all phrase to describe what we're seeing. And so, you know, my center is, you know, this is kind of what we do, I guess, for a living. So, you know, what we see on the streets of Myanmar at the moment is certainly undoubtedly constitutes crimes against humanity under international law. That is to say, it is a widespread and systematic attack on people's human rights, including the things that I mentioned: extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detention, torture, and so forth. So legally, I have no qualms in saying that. Genocide is something quite different, and I don't think we're there yet in Myanmar. But having said that, let me just reiterate what I said at the beginning of my comments, you know, when I spoke. This is a military that has already committed genocide. They would certainly have no qualms in doing so if they felt threatened in a particular kind of way. And as for the kind of the first part of your question, you know, why have they done this? You know, I mentioned my comments, the climate of impunity that they feel. And I mentioned also, and I think this is an important part of it, that the military is quite different from militaries in most countries. It's also an enormous economic enterprise. It literally controls two of the biggest conglomerates in the entire country, which so much of the economy is filtered through the military. It is a thoroughly corrupt enterprise. And so anything that the military sees as weakening their riches, their access to wealth and their access to power, is something that they see as a threat. Why now? Because the simple answer to that question is the military, under decades of pressure, when they first agreed to a transition from military-led rule to civilian-led rule from 2011 onwards. They made sure they wrote a constitution which reserved 25% of the seats in parliament and a constitution which gave them impunity. But they were banking on the fact that, okay, we can't win a popular election, but maybe if we win 25% of the votes, that plus our existing 25% under the constitution means that we control the parliament, means that we control the government, means that the power is still in our hands. But this military and their proxy party is so profoundly unpopular, even before this coup, that they couldn't even manage 25% of the votes, even though the military is one of the largest institutions in Myanmar society. That means that many, many soldiers in Myanmar didn't even vote for military-backed candidates in the most recent election. And so it was the overwhelming defeat of their candidates at the polls, the fact that they realized that they were losing their hold on government and that things were tipping more and more towards something that would look more like a real democracy, is the reason why General Min Aung Hlaing and his acolytes decided that now was their moment to strike and to take power back completely themselves. I hope that helps explain it.
I think so. And then there's a follow-up question from Michael Kaplan. So he's asking, Simon, what's your view of Aung San Suu Kyi?
Oh boy. Well, I think I'm on the record officially as saying that the Nobel Committee should have revoked her prize and taken it back off her. I think it's one of the most astounding falls from grace in the history of human rights. That here's somebody who many people saw as an icon of the democratic movement, as somebody who would strengthen human rights in her country. And yet, during the period of the genocide against the Rohingya, said terrible, bigoted things about the Rohingya, and basically became an apologist for the military. And I don't mean that as in an abstract, pejorative way. As I mentioned, we have been part of this historic court case at the International Court of Justice. She literally flew to The Hague and stood in a courtroom to defend Myanmar's military against the charge of genocide. That's how determined she was to show them that they had common interests, that she was going to protect them, that she saw that their future and her future was bound up. Having said that, the military do not see her the way that she sees them. And they saw her as, you know, somebody who had credibility in the outside world, somebody who had this reputation, somebody who could kind of cleanse their reputation, you know, in this kind of hybrid, half military, half, you know, democratic kind of state. And unfortunately, you know, when you try to ride on the back of a lion, the lion will turn around and bite you. And that's exactly what happened. They feel clearly that they don't need her, and they have dispensed with her. And they see the party that she represents, the National League for Democracy, as being an absolute, posing an existential threat to the things that they hold dear: their money, their access to control of the economy, their control of the political system. And so they have chosen to dispense with her and with the idea of civilian-led rule. So having said all of that and being incredibly critical of her, let me also end by saying, I call without reservation for her immediate release. I call the charges against her are completely false, completely fabricated, and completely unjust. She should be released from detention immediately, and she should take her place as the rightful person who won the last democratic election held in November last year in Myanmar, and should be the president of Myanmar. The fact that she's under detention at the moment is an absolute travesty. But yes, I think let's just say that she will go down in history as being a very complicated figure.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, she is a very controversial figure, a very polarizing figure in many situations. So I think maybe on a slightly lighter note, I have a question for Indra. So this is from Susan Harris. So she's asking, thank you very much for your moving webinar. How can we obtain copies of the book, and will proceeds of the sales assist the poets and artists?
I think we sell copies at the cafe in the Holocaust Center. I don't know where you are. Otherwise, give me your address. We will send you one. And of course, all the money goes to the poetry and poets in Myanmar. I don't know how and how we make this work. But this is, of course, not a business model that we are doing here, but this is really to support the arts and to really have an international collaboration of artists to support change.
Is there a possibility, Indra, that maybe we might give away a copy of the book to someone?
Of course, didn't we want to make a lottery?
Yes,
We
so,
were thinking about asking what is the capital of Myanmar, but I don't know if you are still up to this.
Why not try, Indra? Can they write in the chat, what is the capital of Myanmar? No clues.
And the first three that do it right get a free copy. Apart from Simon, Simon gets a free copy anyway, but because he knows,
he knows the answer.
he is not allowed to type anything in.
yeah, so I'm watching over the chat like a hawk. So I'm going to write down the names of the first three people. So David Kramer says, Yangon, formerly known as Rangoon. Well, I don't know. I don't think so. Well, wait, let me not give the answer right now. Let me just say, that's what David says. And oh, David Kramer now comes back and says, Naipidu. The spelling is slightly off, but maybe we're getting there. Okay, so we have David, and no one else knows. Okay, so the one copy will go to David. So David is the winner of one copy. And then I have another question. So I'm at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Who is the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center? Oh, wait, okay. For the first question,
You
Galit
got it.
Cohen. So Galit is another one.
Galit and Jenny got it right. And we have Sabine and we have David. So Indra, can we give 4 copies?
So we have 4 copies.
Are we generous tonight?
Yes. But we only have to know where they have to be sent to, because the South African mail might be problematic. So we should wait for an e-copy. I don't know. We'll have to check out.
Yeah. Now, everyone, meanwhile, is in Johannesburg, a part of Galit that is in East London. But we can make a plan.
We can make a plan. Okay. So I've written, so maybe David, Galit, Jenny, and Sabine, could you send me your email addresses, please? You can just direct message me your email addresses, and then it will be much easier for us to stay in contact and send you those copies. And then, of course, for the next other question I asked, Mickey Jacobs said Tally Nates is the executive director of the Johannesburg Holocaust. So Mickey also gets a copy. All right. I think it would be lovely to have another poem just to end things off. I'm not seeing any more questions. But this was very touching. This was very emotional. And I think as a South African person, I was born in 1985. So I grew up in the 90s. I grew up in a South Africa, and I had a lovely childhood. But I had a sense that I had escaped something, that my parents and my grandparents had fought a battle that I didn't have to fight. And I grew up with a sense of gratitude for all the opportunities and all the battles that have been won on my behalf. So this is a very special day for me, and hopefully for all South Africans. And it should a day that should make all of us be empathetic to what's happening elsewhere in the world, because we know, or at least part of our history is exactly what's happening in Myanmar and other parts of the world as well. So let this be a moment of remembrance. We are also within the 100 days of Kwibuka 27, which is the commemorative 3 months of commemorating the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Again, another opportunity for us to remember what happened to us and to be grateful for the freedoms that we have, but not just to sit on our laurels and be grateful, but to be inspired to do something, whether it's to write a message, a tweet, but something to conscientize people about what's happening. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, for being part of this event. Thank you, Tali Nate. Thank you, Simon Adams. Thank you, unfortunately, thank you to Lu Galay, who could not join us, but our prayers are with him and his family. Thank you to Maren Bondestein. Thank you to Bongani Kona. Thank you to Tiomo, Mani Nan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And of course, thank you to Indra Woso for putting this, and thank you to the Sylt Foundation. Thank you very much. Maren, is there a poem that we could finally, okay, yes. So let me.
Yes, and again, just to dedicate this to Lu Galay. And it's the title poem for the book, for the collection. The Sorcerer's Truck. The sorcerer parks his battered truck and gets out. He walks away, and the people draw a circle of protection around it. The night wears my shoes and stands on a mountain top. Bone dry, I rise into the sky like the moon. Revolution is personal. When I stumble and fall on my face, you will watch. You and your angry mob will spit in my face. Your angry mob has been like this throughout history. I am alone. That makes you happy, doesn't it? I take a ride in the sorcerer's truck. When I get to another city, I try to forget this one. But I know I won't escape from your angry mob. I will tell them that the cockroach dying under my tongue is a tree. If I lie to them, they might love me. You and your mob are too many. I am just one. I must make sure I don't get crushed under your bodies. The sorcerer's truck shoots towards the new moon on the cinema screen.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Maren, for all your readings this evening. Thank you very much for that. So everyone, thank you. So on Sunday, please join us for another webinar on Sunday featuring Phil Clark and Carl Wilkins about the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. They'll be talking about the Gacaca and COVID-19 and Rwanda today. So please join us for that webinar on Sunday, on the 2nd of May. Good evening, good morning, good day. Thank you. And keep well. And let's hope that happy days will return. Thank you.